In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Reverse the Red Day. My name's Dr. Jenny Gray. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Zoos Victoria and a member of the executive of Reverse the Red. I'm greeting you from Wurundjeri country in Australia, near Melbourne, and it's a beautiful day down under. And I'm so excited to be talking to you today on Reverse the Red and being joined by such an incredible panel of people. I think you're going to have a wonderful day with us today. And it is a moment where we also reflect from Reverse the Red Day last year, just how much this little organization has been achieving thanks to you, your help, and all the incredible work you do. We hosted the first ever World Species Congress, 24 hours live, stories of hope, right around the world. And I don't know about all of you, I cried my way through many of those presentations. They are just so powerful. And if you've missed it, you can go back and find them. You can go back and watch some of those, and warning alert, you will feel optimistic and hopeful when you finished. It is such an incredible pleasure to hear from people who are making a difference. And what we're really all trying to do is deal with the global biodiversity framework target 4. Our goal is to really make that target hum, to help governments, to help local groups, to help communities to deliver on this impressive goal, to make sure that we stop extinction and we start changing the status of animals. Please, as you're joining us today, if you have questions, please put them into the question and answer and put them into the chat. If you are joining us from all over the world, which I know you are, please feel free to tell us where you're joining us from. I love to see that in the chat running down the side of my screen. So we have an incredible forum planned today. And the forum's really looking at the national level. We look so often at species by species level, but the real joy and power of the model comes when at a national level, people are pulled together to work together. And joining me first, and she's going to turn her camera on, is Lucy Bridgman from New Zealand. Lucy, welcome. It's lovely to have you joining us. And Lucy is part of the team developing strategy and implementation for threatened species. And so welcome, Lucy.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
And I'm going to hand over to you to tell us a little bit about your role and then the project you're working on and how your government is tackling this issue.
Awesome, thank you. I'll share my presentation. Bear with me a moment. Cool, hopefully that's on the screen now.
Looks like it.
Awesome. Brilliant, thank you. So hi, I'm a senior technical advisor with the Department of Conservation in New Zealand. And for a number of years, I've been involved in our biodiversity planning and prioritisation work, particularly focused around threatened species. So yeah, I'm going to give you guys just a bit of an overview of what we've been up to recently. There we go. So just a little bit of background about the Department of Conservation. We manage 8.6 million hectares of land. That's 30% of New Zealand's land area. 5.5 million hectares of water, including 52 marine reserves. And we're looking after species and ecosystems to the EEZ boundary. Our budget is around 240 million New Zealand dollars per year for biodiversity, that is. 77 biodiversity focused teams, which is around 1,000 permanent staff. And we recognise tangata whenua, that's our Indigenous Māori people of the land, as kaitiaki or guardians of our native biodiversity. So we work to help them fulfil that role. So our Managing Threatened Species Programme, we currently calculate that we have 4,533 taxa with some form of management needs. And we've come up with that number through our New Zealand threat classification system. So those are the species that are threatened, at risk of becoming threatened, or they're conservation dependent. And so that's across a range of taxonomic groups, pretty heavy in the terrestrial invertebrates and vascular plants, but across lots of things. So we've got a bit of a history around sort of national level species planning and prioritisation. So I guess one of our traditional tools has been having recovery groups for species create recovery plans. We still use this tool. We've currently got about 15 active recovery plans. They're really valuable a social process, but also agreement around species recovery. But they're pretty resource hungry. And once the data's in that plan, it's not so easily accessible for our sort of data-driven planning and prioritization processes. So we've also we've developed these species plans, which are a much more data-based form of a plan. In the past, we've worked up around 700 of these. They've tend to be built sort of species by species. There's been a standardized approach to the data collection, and therefore the data is readily available for our planning and prioritization processes, but we still haven't got anywhere close to our full scope of the program, which we think is the 4,533. So more recently, we've been working on a system that is across all our biodiversity for planning and prioritization. We're calling it the Biodiversity Planning Approach. We've organised all our biodiversity work into 6 program groups: species, ecosystems, threats, research obligations, and also our support programs. And across all 6 species groups, program groups, there are 33 programs that describe our biodiversity work, and they each have a very defined objective. And then within each of those programs, there's a set of outcome plans, which describes all the individual work. And so in our species management group, we've got 3 programs. Under our research program group, we've got 2 programs specifically focused on species. But across also the other programs, there's a lot of overlap of other work that could benefit species. And we've also got ways to account for that. Honing in specifically on the Managing Threatened Species program, which is the one I'm heavily involved in. Each species, or each 4,533 of those species that we've identified that have some management needs to have an outcome plan. So that allows us to describe the full scope of the work. And so that's a big task to develop all those outcome plans. And so the way we've been going about it, we did start off doing the 1-by-1 traditional route, but we realized the volume's just so large. And so what we've been doing is we've recognized that species from similar taxonomic groups or in similar habitats and environments have quite similar management needs. And so we reckoned that we could build these templated outcome plans for species. So the example I've got here is like a dryland plant outcome plan template, which we can clone across lots of different plants, from from drylands. And so we reckon, rule of thumb, around 3 sites or populations might need to be managed to ensure the long-term persistence of dryland plants. And then the activities needed are all very similar usually. So things like browser control, reducing four-wheel drive impacts, habitat management, propagation and monitoring. And so we've also developed modelled costs for these kinds of activities, and we can pop those into our outcome plans. And then we've got a process where we can clone the outcome plans across all the dryland plants, all the species in that group. And then we reckon that we can get 70% of the way of having a decent plan for that species. And so that's the way we're dealing with volume of plans. And what the next step is then to actually build in the detail into the templated plans for the high ranking species as far as possible, and working through that gradually over time. And also what we're finding the templated plans give us is a lot more consistency around the quality to which the plans are being built. And it's driving some really interesting conversations about what makes a good outcome plan for a species. And so across all our biodiversity programs, we're holding all the information, all the outcome plan data in one location. So we're calling it the Outcome Plan Register. It's a database. And alongside having the database information, we're also building GIS spatial polygons around the sites, for the management of species and other biodiversity. Here's the Mahanui giant weta, species close to my heart. And then once we've got all those outcome plans built to a certain level, we'll be doing our outcome plan ranking. And we're using processes that have been used before, building on those, using criteria, benefit, the difference that management makes, chance of success, the cost over the lifetime of the plan, and adding in weightings around taxonomic uniqueness and endemism. And so once we've got all our outcome plans in our outcome plan register across all our programs, built to at least 70%, and we've got them, the costs for them, either our model cost or the detailed, more accurate costs. And then they're all in each program, they're in a ranked order. And then we've built this tool, the budget allocation tool, which allows us to look at where investment might be made. And this is a really useful tool that we're using with our leadership teams to give them visibility of what the budget can be used for. And so this is the species program page. So these are our 3 species led programs. And what you can do is you put in a set budget. So here's the 246 million. And you can move sliders up and down to buy a certain number of threatened species or iconic species or taonga species. And then there's also the same, and there's a page for each of the program groups. And so it's just, for us, been a really valuable way to bring visibility and transparency around investment decisions that are being made in the department. And so next steps for us, we've got more work to do around the ranking. We've done some work there, but we need to do more, building more detail into those high ranking plans, more GIS mapping, and also linking our current work to our outcome plans. We want to be setting targets and also building monitoring and reporting systems. So thank you. That's where we're at now.
Thank you, Lucy. What an amazing amount of work you guys have been pulling together there. And I especially like the budget sheet. You know, the power of that for politicians to see how many species could be saved with different amounts of money. Is that working? Are you seeing them engage with the tool?
I think, that we are finding that it is super powerful to be able to have those conversations at that level around what the scale of the work is to take care of New Zealand's biodiversity. We've built a plan to a certain level for all of those 4,533 species. So that is the scale of the task. And how much does that cost? And what's our current budget? And what can we achieve with that? We obviously can't do everything. So where do we set our priorities? and what are we doing now, and what are we not doing, and what are the implications of that? Like it's a really powerful story to tell, and it is leading to conversations around, what more do we need to do more?
Amazing. And I've always had to say 1,995. I feel even worse for you now that you've got 4,533. Maybe one day we should all just wear that badge always. How many threatened species are we concerned about? Lucy's not going to go away. She's going to stay and be around for a bit more of a discussion later. So I'm now going to introduce Isaac Round, and Isaac's going to join us. He is in Fiji. Isaac, welcome.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Isaac Rounds. I work for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. It is a regional intergovernmental environment organization based in Samoa. My role at the organization, we like to call ourselves PREPIS, and so following the acronym, I'm the conservation officer, protected area officer for the Secretary of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. I may not work directly with species, but I work indirectly in terms of conserving the habitat in which these species reside. So I coordinate protected area work across the region, working with 26 Pacific Island countries and territories, which are members of SPREP, including what we call metropolitan countries that used to have territories in the Pacific, or those that still have territories in the Pacific, which includes France, US. And so we coordinate work across protected area work across the Pacific Island countries. We work through what we call roundtables. So for Pacific Island, we work with what we call the Pacific Islands Roundtable for Nature Conservation, which is basically a short, we call them PIRTS. It's a coalition of basically nature conservation, development organizations, government, intergovernmental organizations, donor agencies, community groups, basically to coordinate work across this vast Pacific region. And so we have a lot of countries who have what we call large ocean spaces. And we also have countries like PNG who are like mega diverse. And so we try and coordinate the protected area work across the region. For me, I work specifically on Target 3 of the GP framework, so the 30 by 30. And so within those, the roundtable, we have working groups. So we have 6 working groups. One is the Nature Culture Working Group. We have the Nature-Based Solution Working Group, which is chaired by IUCN. We have the Pacific Area-Based Conservation Network, which is chaired by SPREP, myself. We have the Pacific Invasive Partnership, which is chaired by BirdLife International. We also have the Pacific Network for Environmental Law. And the last working group, which is the most important one, is the Species Working Group, which is chaired by BirdLife International and Nature Fiji Marangeti, which my colleague Nunia is not able to join us today. So she co-chairs that working group. And you might be asking, how do we coordinate species and conservation work across these wide ocean spaces? We are guided by the Pacific Islands Framework for Nature Conservation and Protected Areas, which is coming up for review very soon, and was launched by the Pacific Island countries during the 6th Pacific Islands Conference on Nature Conservation and Protected Areas, which happens every 5 years. And one is due to happen next year, which will be hosted by the government of New Caledonia, which is a French territory here in the Pacific. And so we coordinate all our work across the Weiss-Volund spaces through those working groups and through the Pacific Islands Nature Roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. I think you're giving us a real insight into the complexities at a very distributed regional level. What are the biggest challenges you face when you're trying to get everyone to work together in this really diverse kind of way for for example, 30 by 30, to get those real commitments and then get action from them?
Yeah, as I said earlier, it's a large ocean spaces spread very far in between, and so we have a lot of capacity constraints in terms of both technical and financial. And technical, we have, countries are small countries. We have very limited financial resources that usually typically go to either species conservation or protected area conservation. So, and that's the role of SPREP, in trying to get countries together in a coordinated fashion. Sometimes coordination can be an issue. We've been working across very different time zones, different levels of capacity. And so we try our best to coordinate all those work through dedicated financial instruments or through dedicated coordinated networks to ensure that at least we are talking in the same language on the same spaces.
And we also have talked a little bit about technical support centers from CBD, so the Convention on Biological Diversity. They work very closely with you as well, don't they?
Yeah, the Technical and Support Center for CBD, for SPREP, it's nothing new. Even though
nothing new.
We have 30-something centers that were selected by CBD last year. For SPREP, this is something that SPREP has been doing for the last 32 years since its inception. I think this is just basically cementing the role that SPREP has been doing. But hopefully what we want is some dedicated financing to come with those designations as well. Typically when this designation come about, it's usually just a designation. There's no dedicated financing that come with it. And SPREP is working with CBD to sort of in discussion at the moment to see how best we could deliver and coordinate the work that SPREP has been doing in the Pacific region for 32 years. So we have
I think that's...
Yeah, we have...
Sorry, that's a clever...
We have the structure in place on how to roll this out. And, it's something other TSC can learn from SPREP in terms of the how to roll it out. So we've been doing it for 32 years. We have the structure in place, the governance mechanism in place to do it.
I think that's where CBD is clever, right? They look at who's doing it well and they make those their pilot countries because they know there's already a good case study. If you were to give advice to another region, what from that experience of 32 years would you say, hey guys, if you want to make this work, this is what you really should be thinking about?
I think it boils down to the regionalism here in the Pacific. How the Pacific countries have been able to come together and work together and say, okay, due to our limited resources, I think we work best as a group. To coordinate the work better, we need to work together. And so I think it needs that, sort of political wisdom from the region that has enabled the Pacific Island countries to work together. It's not, I would say it's not, it's a work in progress. And there are some barriers there still that we need to work together. But as you know, 2 years ago, we put together the State of the Environment for Pacific Islands, which detailed some of the barriers and also some of the, successes that we have managed to learn across those 32 years. And so I guess it's putting aside those differences and, deciding to work together is the key to success in this side of the world. And something that probably advice I would give is to work together. Yeah.
That is such a good example and such a good lesson, because the challenges, as Lucy was telling us, are enormous, and yours seem daunting. I don't even know how you protect all that wide open ocean. And so this working together is really a core of what we need to keep doing, not competing with each other over whatever limited funds, but really saying, where do we work together? Isaac, I'm going to put you on the spot and say, what's your best story of success? What are you incredibly proud of that SPREP has been able to do?
I think one of the successes of SPREP is just basically getting everyone together in the same room and talk and have a good discourse on what are some of the issues that we face, how best can we solve them, how can we move forward. And so we have what we call here in the Pacific is the talanoa, is to tell stories, sitting together, just having that discourse and having a network and telling the stories and how best can we move forward. So I guess that's one of the successes of SPREP. With the limited resources that we have, is just basically getting everyone to have a sit together and have a chat and sit together and talanoa on how best we could move forward with issues that we faced at a regional level and at national level, and bringing those national level issues and successes to the fore, and how best these countries can learn from each other. And so we have a lot of examples from the region, and where each country can learn from each other, and giving that safe space for each country to discourse on what is here in the region.
Thank you, Isaac, and such incredible experience of working at a regional area level. And I think for the billionaire who tuned in, I'm not sure there is one, but I'm always hopeful. Clearly, what we need is capacity, resources in terms of skills, in terms of funding, and I think how we go about securing that together. Now, Isaac, I'm going to give you a final word before I bring in our next speaker, but is there anything else you wanted to share with the people that are listening in today?
Yeah, I think sometimes Pacific Island usually kind of sunk into a bigger grouping, and somehow you tend to get lost in the bigger scale of things. But to me, it's like acknowledging, in the region, it's very different, where the resources are owned by the indigenous people. That's very, very different from other parts of the world. And so in order to do conservation work in the region, you need to work with the indigenous people. The indigenous people, and has to be a bottom-up approach, and has to be people-centered. And so without that, you may not venture, may not be a success at all. So working with the people, the indigenous people of the region, is key to any species or protected area conservation. So
thank you, Isaac.
Having them at the center of everything is key. Naka.
That is a really timely reminder to all of us that absolutely working with Indigenous people is a key to success in this. So thank you so much for that reminder, and thank you for your contribution this morning here. Isaac's not going anywhere either, so when we come back for a few questions, if you have questions for Isaac, please pop them into the chat or the Q&A. And next, I'm going to ask Shana Challenger to join us. She is from Antigua. Shana, welcome. I see she's sharing her screen.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Yes, my name is Shana Challenger. I am from the Caribbean.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and
Okay, I should say our internet is bad in the Caribbean. So if I do drop out, I apologize, but I think I'm okay. So I am from a very small island in the Caribbean. So it's actually nighttime for me right now. And my work is a bit different than what the previous panelists would have done. I actually work for a very small environmental NGO. And so our work, we save species from extinction. We restore islands, and I'll get a bit into it in my presentation, but I am the coordinator of the Offshore Islands Conservation Program. And we work very closely with the government to be able to do this species recovery. So I'm very excited today to be sharing about what we have and to be representing for the small island developing states. I love how everybody's talking about the thousands of species we have, and we have like maybe 10 endemics. So it's interesting seeing the different scales. Ready for me, Jenny? Can y'all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you all right.
Okay. I didn't want to just start. In the meantime, okay, good to go. Okay, perfect. All righty. So the topic of my presentation is accelerating national species recovery in Antigua and Barbuda through inclusive action. So to give you all just a bit of a background, Antigua and Barbuda, we are a small island nation in the Eastern Caribbean, covering about 442 square kilometers. We are made up of 2 main islands surrounded by a lot smaller offshore islands with rich natural and cultural heritage. We only have about 100,000 people, mostly situated around the coastline, but we do have over 365 beaches, one for every day of the year, which means that we are very heavily tourism dependent, and that is a major part of our economy, and we have to continuously balance development and conservation here. And because of our small size and the overlapping interests, there's a lot of close partnership between us and the government, statutory corporations, etc., to achieve our mutual goals for our species recovery. So a little bit about my NGO, where we come in. So I work for the Environmental Awareness Group, also known as the EAG, and we are Antigua and Barbuda's oldest environmental NGO, and we've been at the forefront of conservation work for over 30 years. Our tagline is very simply for the benefit of people and wildlife, and we currently have 10 full-time staff and over 300 volunteers. Our key pillars are biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, invasive species management, educational outreach, capacity building, and partnership development. So let's talk a little bit about what the process has been nationally in Antigua and Barbuda for updating the NBSAP. We are currently, through a UNDP funded project, updating the NBSAP to align with the KMGBF. And the process, they hired a consultant to meet with stakeholders in country. Then she went back and has started the writing of the revised targets, indicators, and activities. And this week, literally yesterday, we have been reviewing them through virtual consultations with all the stakeholders. There is a strong emphasis being placed on areas of high biodiversity importance and priority species on a national level. So this includes some of our endemic and endangered species, such as the Redonda ground dragon on the top, the Barbuda warbler, our only endemic bird in the middle, and the Redonda ground anole in the bottom. But it also includes some of our culturally important species, such as the fallow deer, which is an invasive species, but has a lot of cultural importance in our sister island of Barbuda, so it's still regarded as a priority. So very quickly, I wanted to talk about the fact that at the EAG, although we are an NGO, we have species conservation is our business. Since 1995, we restored a number of offshore islands to save this snake that you're seeing, the critically endangered Antiguan racer. It was formerly the world's rarest snake. Only 50 individuals remained on one offshore island. The numbers were so low, they actually thought it was extinct. And through our conservation work, we were able to learn from partners in New Zealand and complete the first black rat eradication here in the Eastern Caribbean. And since then, we have not only saved the species, but also reintroduced it to other islands and trained other Caribbean NGOs on how to do this restoration work. And again, we're not new to this, we're true to this. We decided, can we scale up this restoration work that we've been doing? The EAG since 1995 has now restored over 15 offshore islands, but here was our third island, Redonda, completely uninhabited, but home to several reptiles that can only be found there and a number of nesting seabirds. And so within a year of just removing the invasive rats and goats, you can see what we were able to do on the Redonda project. and the island and its surrounding seas have just been declared as our country's newest and largest protected area, spanning about 30,000 hectares, again, to save these species from extinction and to show the power of island restoration. So now to the bad part, the funding challenges. So this work is not easy. I think our NGO right now, we are actually like 98% donor dependent. And a lot of these conservation programs rely on short-term grants. So 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, if you're lucky. And a lot of the civil society organizations, we struggle with operational funding despite being the ones who are on the ground. Time spent on grant writing could be geared towards implementation. And I know there's a lot of people who will resonate with that one. That's why I have it in bold. And there's reduced funding opportunities, which is a big thing that we've realized, especially in the most recent years. There's less places for you to be able to get funding from. For example, Antigua and Barbuda were now considered high income, even though we don't see it on the ground. But that means we no longer are eligible for certain grants. And there's also reduced grant amounts. So even the donors who we had before and are still interested in supporting are now asking you to absorb a lot of these in-kind costs. There's also the issue of there not being funding for the boring parts of the project, you know, like the electricity, the internet, paper for printing, that kind of thing. There's only this funding for the sexy parts of the project, you know, going out in the field and monitoring equipment. And not that it's not important, but those other operational costs, they do have a cost. And because we're spending so much time looking after grants, implementing the grants, it's hard to raise that money separately. So very quickly, I just want to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned and key takeaways from this process and elaborate a bit on them. So first of all is the broad stakeholder inclusion that's needed during the NBSAP review process, making sure that it's not just, you know, a tick a box. Okay, yeah, we had the consultation. Did 10 people show up? Sure, instead of the 40 that we invited, but we're okay with that? No. Emphasizing the need for broad, diverse perspectives is really important. Clear delineation of organizational roles and responsibilities for implementation. Don't wait until it's time to report to the CBD again at the 11th hour to say, oh, wait, who was doing what and what was happening? And can y'all scrape this together? No. During the process, start jotting down who is going to be doing what so that you can achieve what the targets seek to do. And it's not just, you know, another document that's not having impact. There's also a need for in-depth monitoring of priority species to define some of the fine-scale impacts. So I know at Reverse the Red, you know, it's a lot about downlisting, about the IUCN red list, etc. But a lot of times, especially on small islands like ours, some of the species, they may seem like if they're doing better than they are, but locally, there might be some issues that are coming up. So doing that in-depth, long-term, consistent monitoring of your identified species, not all of them, just the ones you can do, is really important. Another thing is the identification of how the efforts by CSO will be recognized to achieving the targets. Some of the targets, and a lot of the targets, they kind of allude more to government departments and that type of public in the public space. However, there has to be a recognition of how the CSOs will be doing this, especially with the role we play in citizen science, community engagement, educational outreach. Where will that be captured so that it can count towards the country's reporting? Another thing is that CSO voices, we must be present in global biodiversity discussions to ensure policies actually reflect our realities. Over the past year, I was actually selected as part of the ad hoc technical expert group on the indicators for the KMGBF last year. And I forgot we were in 2025, so that was last year. And being in the room and being able to say, okay, how are we going to help parties to be able to report on these things, and me being able to say, okay, well, that sounds good, but on a local scale with no resources, that might not be best. And so it's very important for our voices to be there and to actually advocate for some of these things. The next thing, again, is to formally recognize the role of NGOs in NBSAP implementation, allocate funding to support their efforts. We know that the civil society organizations are the ones on the ground, we're on the front lines. and maybe you don't have the resources or maybe the interest to implement the NBSAP, give it to the people that can do it, and just reward them handsomely for what they're doing. Just a little something to be able to make sure you're actually meeting those targets, you're meeting the indicators, and the activities are happening. And the last but not least is true biodiversity conservation, reversing the red, species recovery, achieving target 4. It requires collaboration between everybody, between governments, private sectors, NGOs, educational institutions, and local communities. Even us on this call, we're able to, start a network and see where we can learn from each other, so that even if from the top down, there's not movement, we can definitely move side to side and from the bottom up. So with that, I'd like to thank y'all for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and I am ready to hear any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shana. I could listen to you all day. That was just wonderful. And some of you will notice I'm having a few tech issues. My laptop has just changed camera, but that's not going to stop me inviting Isaac and Lucy back. Nobody has asked too many questions, but we do have a follow-up from Chai, who's asking about fallow deer, since they are culturally important and an invasive species. How have you been going about dealing with them and engaging people?
Okay, very good question. And I was wondering whether to put that one on the slide or not. But I thought it's important because, a lot of times we can focus on just, threatened and not culturally important. So with the fallow deer, it's actually on our coat of arms. And they've been on Barbuda for hundreds of years, since colonization. And so they are culturally important in that they are, people go to Barbuda, and that's one of the delicacies that you can get over there. So they are hunted. There are hunting seasons for deer. And so I should say there's a lot of issues happening in Barbuda right now, land-wise. We could have a whole separate talk on that. But of all of the things that are happening with the Barbudans, that is one of the sacred things that they're trying to make sure is not taken out. And, you'll have the hardcore conservationists like me saying, it's an invasive species. It's actually our national animal as well. So the frigate bird is our national bird, and the fallow deer is our national animal. And you have the hardcore conservationists like me who are like, okay, get rid of the invasive species, but you also have to recognize the link and the cultural importance it has to our sister island. And they do have like a communal living arrangement over there. So they have a lot of ties to their ecosystems, to the species that are there, even if they weren't initially found there. So we're making sure that those kinds of things are also represented in the NBSAP. Thanks for the question.
And Lucy, does that ring true for you as well? And dealing with, it's one thing when you're positive, and I think New Zealand's done some really cool work where you were talking about cat eradication, but actually the campaign was for the birds, not against the cats. And I think you guys work in the space quite cleverly.
Yeah, there's lots. It does resonate a lot. We do have a lot of striking that balance around those introduced species, the ones that are important to people. And we've done some quite good social science around the cat stuff in particular, and some stuff around, asking people to just manage their cats differently, and framing it in the way of keeping their cats safe, which has been the kind of, more helpful approach quite often. So it's very interesting.
And Isaac, in an island nation, species obviously move around whether you like it or not. So this idea, we often think of areas being quite fixed and that we want animals to be where they were historically. Often they themselves are choosing to go to different places. How do you guys think about invasive species? And sorry, your mic is off.
In terms of movement of animals across, islands or spaces, I think for us, we're mostly having to deal with invasive species, and that's the one. And that's been done a lot of rat eradication on islands, goat removals, and more recently, there's been a big program that's funded by New Zealand and Australia on the moving on to the invasive plants. But for most of the examples that I can think of is mostly focused on rat eradication, rat control on islands, is mostly to deal with our seabirds, threatened seabirds, seabird colonies, and those mostly undertaken by SPRAP through support of BirdLife International and also Island Conservation. So they've been doing a lot of work, especially across these uninhabited islands, coral atolls, where we have these large bird colonies that they use these islands as roosting areas. So yeah, that's something that I can think of it.
I feel like Mike could invite the three of you back for an islands discussion, because we have, as soon as you started saying rats, I saw all of them starting to nod. Because New Zealand also, you've done a ton of work in terms of rat eradication. We're dealing with some New Zealanders and some of our problem species that are on islands and have similar challenges. So, there really is a lot of speciality around managing small populations on small islands.
Yeah, definitely. Removing rats from islands, that's been, quite a key piece of our work, absolutely. And we're actually trying to sort of work on scaling things up a bit more now. Can we keep rats out of larger areas of even, or bigger islands, or even areas of the mainland? And also we've got some projects around fencing, using pest-proof fences to fence off parts of the mainland as well. So lots of great work that's happening, and lots that people are learning as they go. Quite fascinating.
I'm just looking, there's a question that says, it's Tishana, it sounds like there's a really strong CSO role in driving a lot of conservation efforts in your country. Do you think there's commensurate recognition and support from relevant government agencies?
Wow, what an interesting question. To be completely transparent, the government right now, their focus in dealing with the climate crisis is more so on mitigation and adaptation. That is where a lot of the funding is available for them. For everybody right now, that's where a lot of the funding is available. That's where, it's very visible to have some electric vehicles around, wind turbines, etc. And so, not that there's not recognition. In fact, one government person had even told me off the record, if EAG was to stop, the government wouldn't be able to continue, because they really need that information from CSOs like ours. And we're not the oldest, we're not the only one. We're the oldest environmental one, but there's a bunch of different other groups doing this kinds of work. I think the challenge when it comes to the recognition and support, as we know, these things are very expensive, and sometimes governments don't even have resources to give. Another thing is that, a lot of the funding that the governments might be able to access is very hard for like a small NGO like ours to get accredited to the GCF, accredited to the GEF, etc. And so one of the things that the government of Antigua and Barbuda, through the Department of Environment, has been able to do is to set up a small island resilience and resource fund. So they do have a funding mechanism so that they are able to channel that money to smaller groups who need it. I think they do benefit from the fact that so many of us are doing biodiversity conservation work. Our NGO was actually the group that did the 6th national report on the NBSAP. And when we were going around to the different groups, they realized, oh, wait, we're helping with that. We're helping with that. And that was one of the recommendations that we made to the government, that there needs to be, at least I think annually, if not biannually, a coming together, some sort of one-day workshop where it's just like an update from everybody about what they've been doing, how they've been helping the country to meet the targets, and actually prioritizing it when they're putting it into project proposals, when they're planning their yearly activities. So instead of being like, okay, oh, I'm happening to meet these targets, you're designing proposals and projects with the intention to achieve these targets. Just, working smarter, not harder. And again, giving that bit of recognition to the CSOs on this. I should also say, this is my last bit, is that because EAG has been around so long, we've also helped a lot of the smaller groups. So we've even put together like a proposal writing manual to help them to be able to access these funding, because, there's little small pots here and there. I remember the first time a community group, he said, wait, I can get a printer, I can get a camera to take pictures of the stuff in the mangrove. I'm like, yes, this is how you fund the things that you want. And so just having that dialogue, having that communication is good. And that's why I've been telling the government, empower us to be able to implement the NBSAP, and just, make sure you pay us for it, because we can't do it for free, but we want to do it.
Great lessons there. Thank you so much, Shana. Thank you, Shana, Lucy, and Isaac. They are staying on the line, so we'll get another chance to talk to them at the end of the next session. But I'm now going to ask Mike Clifford to join me. Mike is the Strategic Director of Reverse the Red, and he's going to run through how this all comes together. So Mike, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. And I had my camera off, but my hands were up going, yes, this is exactly the kind of stuff we need to be talking about. So I'm excited to share a little bit more about Reverse the Red and kind of, how does this all come together and how does it work? So if you're new to Reverse the Red, so we are a global coalition that's committed to accelerating and igniting strategic recovery-focused action. So how do we actually achieve these big targets that we've all just been talking about? And how do we support both governments that are trying to deliver on these targets and all of the NGOs and species groups and indigenous leaders, everyone that's working towards the same ultimate goal? So we really do believe that together we can reverse the red. And we've been hearing, Isaac mentioned this and Lucy, and the collaboration is so key. And that's at the heart of everything that we are doing. So what I want you to be encouraged by is that we do know how to recover species. We've done it. We have the science, the tools, the technology, the networks. It's there, right? Now the challenge in front of us is, can we do it at a pace and a scale that can actually overtake biodiversity loss? That's the next challenge in front of us. And so within Reverse the Red, we are constantly looking at how do we do this better. So I want to take a moment and just thank our coalition of executive committee partners. So Reverse the Red is made up of partners that are in universities, NGOs, governments, zoos, aquariums, botanic gardens, all sorts of different organizations. But this group here is our executive committee, which really is the heart of steering the strategy and advancing all of the work of this coalition that all of us are a part of. So where do we sit in the context, right? We've heard things about the Global Biodiversity Framework. We've heard about Goal A. We've heard about targets. Where does this all sit? So the reality is we have these 196 countries who have agreed to the Global Biodiversity Framework and all of the goals that are for the year 2050. Within that, there's 23 targets that are set for the year 2030. And so the way that this works, and Isaac was mentioning this, a lot of focus on target 3, is that these targets all work together to achieve a larger goal. So marine and terrestrial protected areas, climate solutions, species recovery, they all need to work together. But one of the things that we know is that the foundation of biodiversity is species. And so oftentimes as we're talking about all these different strategies and governments are responsible for delivering on so many ambitious targets, that sometimes the species element kind of falls to the wayside. And so we'll see that we'll do protected areas, but we know that statistically there's about 57% of known threatened species. So again, there may be more, but known threatened species need additional urgent management action. And so I love hearing these different stories about the partnership between CSOs and NGOs and governments, and how we actually work together better, or we work better together, excuse me. And so how do we think about these things kind of really functioning? At a core level is we have strategies and actions happening at the international level, national, and the local or species level. The first question is, are we aligned around the same goal? Are we working to halt extinctions, reverse declines, and recover species? That's kind of step one. Is that what we're really aimed after? Step two is that we know often there is a struggle to align the strategies between these different levels. So we have these ambitious targets, but the groups working at the species level may not be measuring or assessing things with the right sets of data that the countries need in order to deliver on those targets and report on those targets. So we have to do the concerted effort to make sure, are we actually aligned? At the international level, obviously we have the Global Biodiversity Framework, but we also have things like the Global Species Action Plan, which breaks down all of the actions needed for species for all the targets. We also have things like the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. There's tools and mechanisms that exist that we can lean into so that we don't have to recreate the wheel. But that alignment is so essential if we're going to do this at scale and at pace. And so where Reverse the Red comes in is, how do we share best practices, tools, and strategies and innovations? And then how do we also amplify success and tell these stories of where it's working? We know that from a change standpoint and a strategy standpoint, that replicating what works is more effective than always just trying to solve the problems, right? We know this. And so what we can do is learn from one another. And that's why I'm so thankful for all the stories that we've seen today and heard today. And I think this quote really summarizes so much of what we're doing. Is we need to move from conservation being random acts of kindness to mobilize strategic coordinated action. Together, we can reverse the red. Together, we can deliver on these targets and on these goals, but that's going to require that we're aligned and we pause for a moment and make sure that we are connected as well as we can. So 2 quick initiatives that I want to share about Reverse the Red and what we're up to. So we launched last year in May the Reverse the Red Species Pledge. We have over 4,000 of these right now, but these are specific organizations or governments or entities that have made specific pledges to specific species in certain countries and identify what actions they are implementing towards the recovery of that species. And what's so fascinating about this data, not only knowing that there's that much commitment to threatened species, but this starts to allow us to understand which groups are working on what species. It also lets us know which threatened species need urgent management actions that are not currently receiving that attention. And then third, it lets us really increase the collaboration. And so again, as these stories that we're hearing, how do we work together better so that we can do this at pace and at scale? And what that leads to is right now, we have over 30 countries where we have a in-country national recovery network. And so what this means is that there is some sort of a civil society network that is committed to species recovery and committed to supporting the governments to do that. These might be national species specialist groups through the IUCN Species Survival Commission. They could be Centers for Species Survival, which there's more than 20 of already. These could be BGCI tree assessment networks. There's all sorts of different groups, but the point is, how do we make a stronger and strategic alignment between civil society and government so that we can achieve these goals? So to kind of wrap everything up together, together we can do this, right? But it's going to take all of us. We have the science, we have the skills, we've been doing it successfully. Now we need to do it at pace. And that's where every one of us and all of you who are listening in on this call, you have a role to play. And we need your role. We need that aligned. And so I want to thank you for being a part of this great story, because I genuinely believe that we will change the trajectory in the course of history for species as long as we come together and we align this effort. So let me pause there and see if you have any questions or anything, Jenny. It's a quick run through of everything we do. But
thank you, Mike. As always, it's really inspiring to hear you talk and to see how this starts to be really strategic and the coming together behind Reverse the Red. Mike, are you going to stay on for the panel discussion, or are you disappearing?
I will stay on for the panel discussion. So I do have an exciting update, though, if you want to hear it.
I always want exciting updates.
Okay, very cool. Well, so I mentioned the Species Pledge really briefly, but we have, I'm excited to announce that we will, at the end of this month of February, we will be opening the first ever Reverse the Red Species Pledge Accelerator Award. So what this is, everything we've been talking about today is how do we do this faster? And so for those groups that have made the Reverse the Red Species Pledge, you can apply for this incredible package of support. So there's funding that comes with this, there's storytelling, there's strategic support, collaboration support, there's a lot of media support that'll come with this. But we're looking for these clever, innovative ideas and ways to accelerate your work in the course of a year. And so all that information will come out at the end of the month, but we are super excited to be able to put resources, and as all the stories we've been hearing, it's yes, it's funding, yes, it's networking, yes, it's innovation, yet it's all of that. And so how do we bring that all together to really accelerate the work that you're doing to recover species ultimately? So we are, that'll, you'll hear more at the end of the month, but we're super excited to tell you about that.
And I think, Mike, that is super exciting. And it's really linking to what Shana said and Isaac said. This idea that there's people out there that are absolutely committed. They have great ideas, and they just short, often not of a lot of money, to get the printer, the camera, the tracking methodology, to be part of a network that really puts them in front of some of the donors and helps them actually get their species moving. So, Shana, the challenge is there when the Accelerator Awards are announced. I'm looking forward to seeing some of your colleagues putting their hands up for this.
Already written it down. Michael and I will be speaking.
Perfect.
And then the other thing that you're going to love, and I'm going to introduce our next two speakers and bring them in. But Mike, you're not just looking at the big charismatics, right? You're looking for awards that will go across a whole raft of different taxons.
Yeah, we're committed to giving awards to fungi, plant, and animal species. So this won't go to kind of the traditional just charismatics. We're looking for good strategies, good plans. And the other thing that's cool about this is the way that we've looked at even the short application process is providing some strategic support for anyone who applies. So how do we get connected to better planning, better strategy? Because we've seen in the 4,000 pledges that we've gotten so far that a large percentage of you all who've made those pledges have asked for assistance. How do we better align our program with the Global Biodiversity Framework? How do we better align with metrics and measures? So we want to provide that help in the application as much as obviously for the smaller group of winners.
So I'm going to ask two more people to join us. Thank you, Mike. Christina Lopez Gallego. I'm messing that up. Sorry, Christina. And
it's okay.
Andy Ange is joining us. Christina, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself first, but I love that you're Colombian joining us from South Africa. So a true global conservation expert. So please introduce yourself and a bit of what you're doing.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks everybody for being here. It's really exciting to be here talking about species conservation. I'm Cristina Lopez Gallego. I'm the co-chair of the Colombian Plant Specialist Group. I'm also the co-chair of the Colombian Species Specialist Group, in which we're trying to get together people working in animals, plants, and fungi to join forces so we can better improve the impact of our conservation actions at the national level. And actually, I work with cycads. Those are my favorite plants. So I'm also in the cycad specialist group working in conservation in Colombia and other places of the world like South Africa.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. And Andy, you're from Singapore and Mandai. So please tell us a little bit about your role.
Good morning. My name is Andy and I'm from Singapore. I think Shana just now was talking about small nation, and I also represent a small nation. She has over 300 beaches, but Singapore we have like 10 and most are man-made. So I was a little bit envious. Anyway,
you have to come.
Bring me. So I am from Mandai Nature, and Mandai Nature is actually the conservation arm of the Mandai Wildlife Group, which manages the Singapore zoological parks like Singapore Zoo, Night Safari, and Bird Paradise. Mandai Nature is the non-profit conservation organization, focuses on trying to advance efforts for nature conservation with a focus in Southeast Asia. And we host the IUCN SSC Center for Species Survival, Southeast Asia, the Asian Species Action Partnership, or ASAP, and also the Conservation Planning Specialist Group, Southeast Asia Resource Center. So within Mandai Nature, my role is largely on supporting the Assess, Plan, Act framework. So where we assess species, looking at their conservation status and the threats, and then developing a plan to conserve them, and followed by acting so that we can reverse the red and, hoping to support the prevention of extinction of species. So for me, of the three areas, I do a lot more in the act, where since 2016, I've been managing the Species Action Plan for a critically endangered primate that's only found in Singapore and Malaysia. So this is the Raffles-banded langur. It's a leaf-eating monkey and is considered one of the top 25 most endangered primates in the world. So even though Singapore is really small, we are home to this critically endangered monkey. And so I've been studying them for about 9 years now. I think just now when, was it Isaac? I think Isaac mentioned about different working groups, right? You have working groups looking at species, maybe at habitats or communications or different areas. But for us in Singapore, it's interesting that we have many working groups as well, but we are focused on individual species. So we have like a langur species working group. We also have like an otter working group. We have urban wildlife working group. We have a snake working group. So, I mean, maybe we can discuss it later in the Q&A. I just wanted to also find out more from you what your thoughts are in terms of the working groups. What would work, what wouldn't, and would a species working group work better, or would like a different topical working group work better? And so I managed the working group since 2016, and I would say that one of the successes that I've seen is that because we introduced this citizen science program, it's been running for 9 years now, and every 6 months we would train and recruit volunteers to go out there to nature areas to observe the langurs, to report sightings. And we use this data to work with the national agency in Singapore in order to reduce the threats, whether is it roadkills or deforestation or poaching. And so over these 9 years, we have about 900 volunteers already. And even though, it's just a couple of years, we have seen that the awareness on this elusive primate has increased, such that, in the past, if we go to a nature area and we talk about this leaf-eating monkey, they would not be aware. The more commonly cited long-tailed macaque would be, in their impression of a monkey, and they don't really have very good impression of monkeys, unfortunately. But over the years, because of the citizen science program and the volunteers go out to reach out to residents, if we now go into the nature reserve and we say, there's this critically endangered monkey, they will tell me what name it is and how excited they will be to see the primate. So I felt like even though it's just a couple of years of work, if we reach out to the ground, we can see that improvement in awareness quite quickly. So I think I'll just leave it there and perhaps have a nice discussion at the end.
Thank you, Andy. I think you've done half of my job for me, because you asked two really important questions in this that I'm going to pass straight over to the other two panelists. And Christina, you work across a lot of different working groups. I think Andy's opening up an interesting question of, are we fragmented? How do we bring people back together? How do we get working groups actually collaborating and working together? What are your thoughts on that, Christina?
Yeah, I think that's a great challenge, actually. In my case, Colombia is a relatively small country, but we're a mega diverse country. So we have thousands and thousands of species. And I also want to go back to a point that was being made earlier. We do have identified thousands of threatened species already, but we have many more that we have not done the red list assessment for. So we might have a lot more species that are threatened. So we need to move forward to identify the threatened species, but also, maybe KBAs or priority sites for the species, and, to do more conservation planning. And then we need to be strategic about how to, achieve that. And so far, what has been happening, I think that this is common in many parts of the world. The amphibian people work by themselves, and then the plant people by themselves, and the fungi people by themselves. And sometimes we collaborate, but I don't think we present as a unified front to governments, to NGOs, to many other stakeholders that may be interested in species conservation. So, you know, the mammal people are saying something to the government, and then the fungi people is doing something else or doing a different recommendation. So I do think we need forums or fora where we can interact, learn from each other, just like Reverse the Red, but at the national level, and integrating these different groups of people that, yes, we have different approaches and we need different things many times, but also we have a lot of common challenges and a lot of common successes also that we can show together, so we can appear as a, you know, as a united people that are trying to save a species and biodiversity in general. So I think it's just a matter of talking to each other and having spaces where we can, somebody else was saying, to get together in person. I mean, virtual meetings are amazing and there's a lot of things we can do with technology, but just getting the people in the same room, talking together and strategizing together, dreaming together, I think is really important.
Mike, do you want to add a bit on what's happening at national level? Because you're both absolutely right. There are, you know, we're often looking for the action that can actually help a whole lot of different species is the most effective way, but the way we set up at the moment often doesn't bring us to that point. But Mike, what are you guys working on? We can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you, got it. So completely agree with what we're saying. And, you know, we're fortunate in Reverse the Red to be interacting in a lot of different countries at the same time. So my one caveat is that every country is different. And so there's no one thing that works exactly, but we can learn from each other and we can accelerate the work by not recreating the wheel. So that's one thing to just start with. The other is that I think, you know, there's a few systematic issues that we need to start addressing if we're going to think about doing this at pace and scale. And so one of the challenges, Christina, building off what you were saying, is we see that where all these different species groups or individual NGOs approach governments independently. And so for most governments that have relatively small teams, it's overwhelming to try to handle all of the inputs coming from all these different groups and different requests and things. Not a lot of governments are set up to be able to do that. But if we can come together around a shared goal, and I think that's one of the things that misses, is we often are, well, my goal is for primates, or my goal is for spiders, or my goal is, no, we have a bigger goal. The bigger goal is to see biodiversity recovered successfully. And then we can take a strategic and systematic approach to determine where are we most likely to succeed, where are efforts well positioned to make movement. Things like the conservation status improvement strategy that Reverse the Red has is an outline of how to look at, you know, how to make the most impact the most efficiently or effectively, essentially. So, and then the other thing I would throw in, just to be a little rambunctious maybe, is that I think some of the reason that we work independently is because our funding structures are built on us getting credit for what happens. And so it takes a bit of bravery for all of us as organizations to come together from a place of abundance and collaboration and not needing to get the credit for something. And I do see that percolate to the top frequently in collaborative discussions around species conservation. So I'll throw those couple of thoughts in there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And Andy, yes, I can see you linked in.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with what Mike was saying. And also one thing I realized is that at least from Singapore and also some of the partners that I work with, we bring people together, right, to assess the status of different species, and then we plan, we produce action plans. But one thing or one challenge that I observe is that after all this work being done to produce the action plan, there was no action. Or limited action, as in it could be because of various factors. Maybe one, it's that there is no sufficient funds or resources to support a dedicated person or team to drive the action. And then, you know, there could be also a working group to oversee the management of the action plan, but because there's no one dedicated staff member or a team, it became that too many people provide advice on what should be done, but nobody's actually doing anything. And unfortunately, because of that, it could be like 5 years down the road, 8 years down the road, when somebody suddenly remembered that, hey, what are we doing with this species? And when they come together again, they say, oh, the action plan that was produced 10 years ago is now outdated. Let's do another plan. And so another plan is being done with a lot of people's input, really excited. And then the cycle, I guess, started again. So I think this is one challenge that I see, and maybe just want to emphasize the need to drive action and bringing funds to have a dedicated team to do that.
I think you're absolutely right, Andy. And it's where we've been involved in species recovery, like the Eastern Barred Bandicoot, it actually starts with one person who has nothing else to do all day, every day, but save that species. And once you can create that one person, so if I listen to New Zealand, they only need 5,000 people to make this work. But once you have that one person that's thinking and collaborating and starting to say, if I talk to those people, I can get them to change something small that makes a difference for my species. That really, really works. And that's the model, Mike, of the Centers for Species Survival that we're seeing start to crop up right around the world now. Mandai, you are one. But overall, Mike, how many centers are there? And the fundamental principle is that it's not just volunteer work you do after hours if you're a nice, passionate person. Someone has to be paid to do this work so that they can give it 100% of their effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's over 20 centers for species survival now, and they were really work in complement with like what Christina was speaking to, the National Species Specialist Groups, which that is more of a volunteer network of all these different taxonomic experts that come together to provide guidance and support. But the centers is a new model that's, and so much credit to Dr. Keerla Milam for creating this and steering it, and John Paul Rodriguez for all the support behind it through IUCN Species Survival Commission. But they essentially, it's different organizations, oftentimes botanic gardens or zoos or aquariums, that will fund a full-time position, if not multiple full-time positions, dedicated to either a taxonomic expertise or a national expertise, or a geographic kind of region as well. But that's the point, is really putting in specific full-time staff dedicated to this. So I'm completely with you. If we see so many systems where it's relying on volunteers, and that's good, and we understand the passion, and yet one of the points that I always make is, if we look at what's the cause of biodiversity loss, is ultimately the extraction of value from biodiversity in some way or another, whether that's human growth or extraction of products or something, or food or whatever. That's happening with full-time employees, many of them, a lot of strategy and a whole lot of resources. And it's not necessarily being done maliciously, but it's happening. And so we can't imagine that we're going to counter that on a volunteer basis. It just doesn't work. So we need to have specific committed staff with good strategies behind what they're doing.
Yeah, I think
Jenny,
that's absolutely.
if I can say, sorry, finish your thought.
Oh, carry on. Come on in.
Thank you. I was going to say, of course, working in taxonomy groups is usually easier because, expert knowledge and many of the planning and the context are easier if we're doing taxonomy groups. But in Colombia, we have tried other approaches because we're trying to be strategic and try to take every opportunity we can. So, for example, our government has declared 4 ecosystems as strategic ecosystems for different reasons. For example, Páramo, which are these high altitude savannas in the Andes, because they're very important for water production for most of our population, actually, and then dry forest and mangroves and wetlands. So, for example, we're taking advantage of that because there are resources that the government and some agencies, even the private sector, are putting into those strategic ecosystems, and we're saying, okay, let's work with the Páramo biodiversity. So let's get together, fungi, plants and animals and algae and other eukaryotes and bacteria, if possible, and let's work all in dry forest or in Páramos. So I think we also need to be strategic, look for the opportunities where they are. For example, there's also a lot of attention now going into restoration, ecosystem restoration, forest restoration in our case. So let's work with forest restoration and see how we can promote biodiversity conservation in the restoration initiatives for different taxa or for different, groups that are not necessarily taxonomic groups.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the other thing that I love to see is when everyone comes together and goes, actually, your species, your taxonomy is in a world of pain. How do we all help you? And how do we find success stories where we work together that's a bit bigger than our own individual interests? And it's challenging to do that because, as Mike says, we often want to have had ours succeed. But imagine we all were able to say, actually, we did this together. And then we can move on to the next one and the next one. It almost seems like we're ankle tapping each other sometimes instead of coming together. Now, Mike, there's also the Global Center for Species Survival, and Andrea's just jumped on the chat to say hello. Do you want to tell everyone what that is?
Yeah, so the Global Center for Species Survival, which is based at the Indianapolis Zoo in Indiana, United States, is a fantastic resource. And so what's unique about that is rather than being focused geographically, as in their own country, where many of the, Andy, like you were mentioning, your center in Singapore is really very focused in Southeast Asia, which is fantastic. So we can really hone in on what needs to be done there. The Global Center has staff that are focused on all the different kind of taxonomic areas. So there's a series of species specialist groups through the IUCN SSC. And so that team provides an amazing amount of support to them, helps with coordination. We've all been talking about networking and relationships, which sounds so easy to say, but to actually do it is quite complicated. And it's a lot of time and it's a lot of energy. And so again, that's what the Global Center is able to provide, is that human power to connect, to support. And one thing that they do that I really appreciate, and something I think we can all learn from, is oftentimes when their staff is working with a particular taxa, they start by asking, what help do you need? And I know that sounds like such a simple question, but oftentimes I think for many of us within the conservation sphere, whether we're PhDs in our particular field or something, we kind of come in, or we're asked to come in because we know things. But sometimes it's also important to find out what we don't know and where's the gaps and where are we missing. So I love that question is such a great place to start, is where do you need help? What are you looking for? And it's such a great start of any partnership, whether it's conversing with a government or a fellow NGO or a species specialist group or a national species specialist group, but simply saying, where are the pain points? Where's it hurting? Where's it not working? And from there, we can start to really find common ground and start to understand what resources can we bring, what expertise can we bring, and how do we move this forward. So the Global Center does a lot of that and helps in those ways, but a good overarching kind of way to think about relationships and partnerships.
Now, I want to change topic a little bit and go to the second part of what Andy raised when she started talking, which is the citizen science engaging community. There's a question from Kelly who says, how do you get people engaged if they don't even know about these things, these creatures, the animals we're wanting to talk about? And so really looking to you as well, Christina, CICADs. How do you get people excited about CICADs and the role of citizen science?
Yeah, in my experience, people love nature by is a basic instinct that everybody has, but we just have forgotten about it. I remember at UCN, the Education Commission did a lovely campaign some years ago about love and not loss. We just need to remind people about their connection to nature. And in my experience, every time you start talking about cycads and how they're pollinated and how they're dispersed and how they grow and why they're so slow or so resilient, everybody gets interested. I think we just need to get people the stories and the things that make us wonder about nature. If we just tell them to other people, they will wonder too. Most people just don't have the opportunity, the privilege that we have to be so close to nature and to be working in these species and these systems. So I know, it's kind of like everybody says this, and it seems like it's just another stereotype, but it's about getting the message out, education, and just, trying to get more people engaged, and knowledgeable about nature, and they will want to collaborate. They all, because every time I tell stories about cycads, everybody gets in love with cycads, and then you tell a story about a butterfly, and they get in love with the butterfly, and you tell a story about a fungi, and they get in love with the fungi. I mean, nature is amazing to most everybody, I will say.
And yeah, I agree with you about the need to get people to reconnect with nature. And what I've observed is that it got easier for me to recruit volunteers after the pandemic. So during the pandemic, lockdowns, people can't go out. In Singapore, people like to go to shopping centers, right? And so we can't go to shopping centers anymore. And the only place outdoor that we can go to that the government allows was nature areas, because they see it as a place for you to exercise. And so because of that, during the pandemic, people started to go out to nature areas, and they started to see things that they did not observe before, and they started to share on social media, because again, they have nothing else to do, right, during lockdown. And because of that, there's also more awareness about mental well-being, and mental health, especially how it connects to nature. So because of that, during that time, we also emphasize the need to reconnect with nature, being out there, ecotherapy. And so when you're out there, not just observing wildlife, but you can contribute to protecting the wildlife that you're seeing. So I felt that we have more momentum in recruiting volunteers and getting them excited. So once the word spreads, they tell their neighbors, weekends, I bring my kids out to go see this monkey, to see this plant, and I actually contribute. And so then because of that, the kids also get to convert that into a mini school project, and they contribute volunteer time, values in action projects in their school curriculum. So from there, it became like not just a volunteer activity, but a school project and also a family time. So I guess for me, I see that in my circle of volunteers, how they benefited and how they spread this word to their friends.
I think this is a great topic and a good time to bring back the rest of our panelists. So Isaac, Lucy, and Shana, if you want to jump back into the discussion, we're going to open up for questions. So please, anyone who has questions, find a couple of tricky ones. This is a very smart panel, so don't be shy asking them some hard questions. And there is one that I think is really a fair one, which says she's a young person trying to break into the environmental field, and there's strong competition. And do you think negative early experiences in the field contribute to hesitancies in collaboration and finding opportunities? So, even from day one, you almost have to compete with everyone to get a job, to get funding. I get very annoyed by how many processes we go into that are competitive and set us up to compete against people we should really be collaborating with. But advice to young people about competition, and let's start with Isaac, and then I'm going to bring in Shana, Lucy. We'll see how you guys go. But Isaac, what's the advice you give to young people who are passionate?
I think this is a great question. I remember when I was in undergrad, I had a lot of good friends who were, doing, accounting, and they were basically asking, what are you going to do when you finish? What, you're going to go back teaching, or, what job you're going to have? So there was a challenge. My advice is, if you can volunteer, start off. Don't wait after uni to do this. My suggestion is to try and volunteer even during uni days. That was my main sort of entryway into the conservation space. I started very early on, midway through my undergrad. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to do my graduate studies, but my advice to people even now who ask me, how can I get into the conservation space, is try and at least volunteer in any conservation organizations you have. And that gives you a sort of a leeway into, leadway into the conservation. But at least when you graduate, you sort of know what sort of conservation field you want to get onto. Whether you want to do what species you want to do, or you want to do protected area work, or you want to do marine or terrestrial, sort of guide you into what you want to do when you finish. So my advice is if you can start early and volunteer, that's a good way to start and get into that space.
Yeah, great answer. And one of the things I've been doing recently is when young people come to me and say, I want to do conservation, what should I do? I say, what's the other choice? And they say, oh, the other choice is I'm going to study law. Then I say, go study law, become a lawyer, and be a lawyer for the environment. Because there's so many people who want to be out in the field working directly with animals. I want accountants, lawyers, government officials, people who maybe will find a job that pays a lot of money as a lawyer and then leave us all your money. Work with us as a lawyer rather than thinking you have to be the one who's struggling in the field. Shana, what's the advice you give to young people?
I am going to piggyback off of that point that you just mentioned, Jenny. I'm definitely going to have to steal that one. If you're thinking about conservation, don't. I love that. Because one of the things that we actually do at the EAG, recognizing, that interest and the fact that, people want to know what are my options as a young person. Every year, we actually put on something called a Green Job Symposium, where we have about 8 panelists, and we do it kind of game show style. As y'all can tell, I'm very energetic, and it's not just me, it's just our organization. And we do this thing where we have 8 panelists that come on. And of course, you have like hardcore scientists on there, but you also have like a wildlife filmmaker, you have an ecotourism operator, we've had an environmental lawyer, we've had a sustainable architect, we've even had a graphic designer who has helped us render some species before. So you show these different careers and let them give you the reality of what it's like in the country and what options are available, because we believe as well, it's not just everybody is not going to be doing the diving and all of that. Like me, I don't do crabs and I don't do plants. I do animals. So, everybody has their little thing and you still need people to fill those areas. And we tell them any job or profession that you are thinking about doing, make sure you see some sort of environmental spin that you can put on it, especially with what's going on in the planet. And so this is targeted at like secondary school, like high school, upper, okay, what do y'all call them? Like the upper levels, like 10th, 11th grade, and then like college level students who are like 17, 18 before they go to university and make that choice. My other advice that I would say is to, building on what Isaac said about looking for volunteer opportunities, also look around and figure out what are the gaps that exist in your country. Because if there are gaps, that will make you a lot more competitive, because they're like, oh, like for example, in Antigua, we have a big gap on expertise with invertebrates. So if there's any bug people on the call, please email me, right? So we're good at collecting them, and then we have no idea how to ID them. So for example, invertebrates, that is one gap that we have. So if you are coming up in the conservation realm and you want to keep yourself competitive, try to look for some sort of gap that exists in your country, so that when you come on the stream, you might be able to leverage some more support because you are filling a gap. And then the last thing I would say is to get some skills under your belt that can be transferable. Even if you decide to be like a consultant, for example, or doing policy, etc. If you are able to do some sort of wildlife monitoring, some sort of outreach, like just having different skills that make you as an individual in this field a bit more attractive, it can definitely help in the long run. So those are my things that I would say. Oh, last thing, don't get discouraged. This field is very depressing. And my friends will always be like, Shana, what's the point of this if the planet is gonna die anyway? And it's just the facts. That's just the long and short of it. It's a very depressing field. Whenever I feel that way, I always just go back into nature and I see the species that are like proof that, conservation works, that they need our help, reset, maybe have a little drink, and then get back to it, because it can be a very, very depressing field. While I was doing my master's in the UK, Jane Goodall actually came to our course. And one of the things she said was to try to just change one heart and mind at a time. Whatever you're doing, just try to change one at a time. And eventually the 1 will have impact. And we all know the impact she's had today. So those would be my little tips and advice.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm going to hand to Mike, who's an architect come conservationist late in life. But I love that idea of find where the joy is. You know, working with species, every day one is hatched, one is born. We found another one, a new plant grew. Like, find those little moments, because sure, there's enough depression to sink a ship, but there is also hope and joy. And listen to people like you guys, where we're actually making that impact. Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to, building on what everyone is saying, so I think this is so important, bring it back to a little bit to the global biodiversity framework in these really ambitious targets. One of the phrases that's used in there is whole of government, whole of society, that we need to tackle on this. And I think that we have the opportunity. I love what everyone is saying, is how do we leverage architects and strategists and economists and all the different fields that we can, because all of those fields matter and it's all connected. I mean, we're all, for us as ecosystem scientists, we know this better than anybody, that it's all connected. And so something that I think is amazing, and Lucy, you may be able to speak to this a bit too, is as we have clarity of what a country, a nation is trying to achieve for biodiversity, and we have a sense of what that plan is, then it's so much more effective to then say, hey, architects, what do you think? Or, hey, economists, what do you think? Where right now, I think so much of our approach is kind of one thing at a time, that it's just so messy and clunky to know how to even navigate it. But if we can get organized and have that cohesive national strategy, like, whew, man, we can be firing on all cylinders, right? Or we can really be revving on all engines or something. So just a thought.
And I think that's great. And I'll pass to you, Lucy. For me, it's also, we often choose things that no one else can do. So when you say you have to kill cats, no one's going out there killing cats. It's just not. Your neighbors won't like you when you do it either. So governments do those things. But when you say you could plant this plant that butterflies love, every single person can do that. And so I think finding things that everyone can join us doing is really, really important, and have those moments. Lucy, following this idea of getting everyone behind a plan, but also finding the things that may not be the optimal solution, but actually can help other people get involved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we're already sort of being able to quantify and identify where the gaps are in our resources, in just, you know, the knowledge that we have about certain species. You know, how many threatened macroalgae we have, who knew? And where is our resource to, you know, provide management advice about them? And so we're looking at where we need to potentially recruit in future in the department, but also, you know, working further back, actually, we need to encourage universities to have students coming through that have those skills, and yeah, really think about those pathways. Yeah, very much so. And actually in New Zealand, you'd be surprised at what the public are willing to do for native biodiversity. So we don't always rule out you know, taking on some of the tougher challenges. But for us, it's really another way that we want to use our system is, you know, our community groups are so passionate, such a fantastic resource for conservation in New Zealand. We couldn't do anywhere near the things that we do without them, and they're leading some of the really groundbreaking research and conservation projects. But often they need resources from us, and we would love to to invest in all of them. They're all doing fantastic work. But having our system means that we can say, oh, what are you doing, and how does that fit with all the stuff we're responsible for? And if it's really high priority, woohoo, yeah, let's work together on that. But if it's not, we just, you know, we can't fund you at the detriment to something that's really critically threatened, or we need more money to do that. So yeah, it's just a really valuable resource to put everything in balance and perspective.
I super love as well little kids. One of the things that gets me excited is kids fundraising. You know, they bake cookies and sell them and bring you $20. But if lots of them do it, it actually becomes enough to buy that laptop or that piece of equipment that we really need. And who can say no to a 12-year-old that's telling you you have to help save the planet? Next question that's come up in our Q&A, and you guys are so good at answering, it's amazing, is around plants and saying, you know, are there initiatives of this kind focusing more on the flora and the impact then that would have on animal species? And Christina, it's like this was written for you, this question.
Yeah, we do have that problem with plants that, animals and especially big animals tend to get more attention. So we have to struggle to get attention to plants. And actually, I want to say also fungi is even more difficult than plants, but maybe even some invertebrates as well. So we do have all this huge amount of biodiversity that we don't get as much resources and attention for. And in the case of plants, we do have, as Mike was mentioning, a global strategy for plant conservation. And some countries, but not all of them, unfortunately, we have national strategies for plant conservation. Colombia has one, Brazil, Mexico, China, South Africa, and some other countries. And with fungi, they're trying to also develop, like global strategies and maybe at some point national strategies. And what we do is that, for example, for the global strategy for plant conservation, we tell the countries, and by extension, everybody that wants to contribute to plant conservation, that they can report, for example, for the global biodiversity framework, they can report separately for plants. That was how it was working before this new version of in the global biodiversity framework. Now we have like optional targets that are specifically for plants, and hopefully someday for fungi and other organisms. So yeah, we have like to go a little bit, we have to do the extra step to promote conservation of these other groups that get less attention, but we're getting there. And I think people are beginning to pay more attention to other groups. But yeah, we definitely have to push it a little bit. And like every time I'm in a government meeting or with an NGO and people talk only about animals, I'm like, yeah, remember that also plants and fungi. And every time you just have to let people know, you have to broaden your horizon. Species are more than just animals.
And Isaac, I think we often think that target 3, the 30 by 30, will pick up the plants, but it's not a given, is it? You actually have to consciously go after the right areas.
Yeah, that is correct. Sometimes these plant species occur around outside of KBAs or MPAs, and so you really need to strategically see and see how can you have them these particular plant species included in this national sort of framework. I myself, I'm trained as a botanist. I've done plant conservation work, and so I'm quite familiar with the issues of plant falling outside those, especially in the region where you have a lot of really critically endangered plant species that are found that are really, really restrictive in terms of the endemism. They can occur in one specific mountaintop, on a particular river, and so having them included can be tricky when you have small islands and you're competing with national infrastructure. For example, water catchments, electricity dams, and so where one critically endangered species might impact, say, the building of of a particular dam that might impact water for the population, and so you're having to compete with national interest, and so trying to balance those can be tricky, and so you really need to think outside the box on how can we work together with the national needs to conserve plant species. The other issues on the question from a person from the Philippines in terms of plants and animal interactions. A good example I could say here in the region is on crested iguanas. They are only found in dry forests. For here in Fiji, they only occur in less than 10% of the country. We have 4 crested iguanas, and having to, and crested iguanas are herbivores, and so really need to think about if you need to increase the population of iguanas, you need to also think about the plants that they feed on. So, and that's something that we need to think about.
Isn't it just so true that we keep breaking it down when actually it's all interconnected? And Andy, you can't save your monkeys if you don't save the plants they need to live on, right?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm really not knowledgeable about plants, but I would, in the citizen science program, always emphasize the interconnectedness as well. When we talk about the animal species, we also need to talk about the plant species, the fungi, the ecosystem, the relationships between each other. And so in the data collection, when they go out there, they will also help me try to collect some, dried leaves, the fallen plants, the leaves for us to identify the species of the plant that the langurs might be feeding on. And then with this information, we actually we are doing this tree planting activity as well, so that we are planting those food plant species within the habitat to restore the area. So I think it's also important for the volunteers to see like their work is being translated into actions on the ground. And over time, you can then see that as we are using those information to restore the habitat, you can see the landscape change too. So for me, that's my only contribution about plants, but really, really happy to learn about the global strategy for plants.
Now I'm going to use my prerogative as chairing this session, and you guys have been absolutely fantastic. Mike, I didn't come back to you, but I know you were going to say that BCGI is a member of Reverse the Red, and plants are super important in everything we're doing. And they're on the executive committee as well, and give us a hard time when we all, and you can't get past John Paul without talking about fungi. He never lets us forget fungi are really important. And I think that's the message. But I'm going to put you all on short notice with a really tough question, which is my favorite question. If you were all powerful, so I'm giving you unlimited powers, you can change anything in the world you would like to change. I can see you all staring off into the horizon as you think about this question. What would you change? What would you magic wand make different in this world? And I'm randomly at the order on my screen going to start with you, Christina.
I will give everybody the opportunity to live in a beautiful place connected with nature for at least a year. And then I'm sure everybody will protect nature.
I'm signing up to come and live wherever that is. Andy, you're up next.
I'm still looking into my window and the horizon to think, but I would say if I have the power to do something, I actually want everyone to have the ability to empathize more. I think there is this lack of empathy. And so as much as we try to do education and outreach and try to get people to understand, sometimes it's hard for them to connect. And a simple thing like a monkey carrying a baby, right? And you approach really closely and try to take a very good photograph, and the monkey might react aggressively towards you. And that's when the person might felt threatened and say, why are you doing this? The monkey is attacking me. You need to control the monkey population. But if you can empathize why this behavior actually occur, just think of yourself carrying a baby and a gorilla were to approach you with something strange in your face, you would react. So sometimes I felt that as long as people have some kind of empathy, they might be able to change certain perspectives and make it a better place for everybody. Yeah, so that's probably what I want to say.
Lovely. Thank you, Andy. Lucy.
Oh gosh, such great answers. And I feel like I suck at these questions. My immediate thought was just like, oh, can I just have unlimited money?
Let's take it. We'll all take unlimited money.
But I love the hearts and minds approach, because that's where it's really at. And I think there is, like, when we think of sort of poverty, we think of poverty in the sort of resource sense, but I think there's a great deal of poverty in nature, poverty from nature across the world. And I think if we could reverse that to some extent, that would be part of the pathway. Thanks.
Lovely. Isaac. Sorry, you're on mute. we're missing these words of wisdom.
Yeah, sorry, it's a tough one. It just brought to mind there was an ad propped up on YouTube a couple of years ago on You Need Nature. And so for me, working in the region, if I have unlimited money to spend on species conservation, for me, it'll be working with the indigenous people and see how best we could, develop solutions that are bottom up, that are indigenously led, and so that would be my answer to the question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Lucy, I was kind of with you initially, like, how much money can I have? But I think there's two things that are in my mind. One is that every person could understand what they need, like truly need, in order to be happy. Because I think so much of our drive to consume and to acquire and collect comes from a human need to be happy. I mean, even if we're not always aware of it, so I think it's more societally than anything. But I think that would be, if I could kind of wave my magic wand. And then connected to it, maybe part two, is that we can learn how to listen. And I think that listening is to nature, it's to each other, it's to silence. It's, if we could learn how to listen, I think we'd end up in a different place than we are.
Thank you, Mike. And lucky last, Shani, you get to bring us home.
I feel like this is the hardest because everybody's gone already. Yeah, other than the expected ones, I think for me, just seeing the power that restoration has, I think just worldwide mandatory rewilding.
Yeah.
Even because the thing with conservation is that it doesn't stop. Even if, the species is recovering, the drivers increase, and you're back to square one. So just prioritizing some rewilding projects worldwide. And I think focusing on that, I know Andy mentioned empathy. I think here in the Caribbean, it's more apathy. Like, people just don't care, like, okay, the mangroves are dying. Okay, the coral reefs are dying. What does that have to do with me going out with my friends on a Friday night? So emphasizing that connectedness to nature, which I think we've lost quite a lot of. I think the previous generations were a lot more closely connected to nature. And like Michael said, if they do listen, if people are more observant, then they can pick up on things and hopefully know better and do better. So I think that's and of course, make sure that all of the NGOs and civil society organizations have some sort of empowerment given to them, So I have to root for my people. So those are the kind of things that I would want to do.
Thank you all so much. Those are just wonderful answers. And it really, you can see why it's my favorite question. It forces us to think and gives us such amazing answers. And I love that you guys went from everything from changing people to being empathetic and knowing what makes them happy to just give us more money. We can show you how to rewild and bring it back. And I love the idea that sometimes we just have to stop destroying animals and nature. Actually, it bounces back all on its own with a lot less work. Please join me, everyone who's in the audience, in thanking this incredible panel that we've had this morning. It has been such a wide-ranging conversation. It shows us so many grounds for hope. When it comes to saving species, we know it works. We have so many great examples now, and we were talking even before we came on. There are species being downlisted as we speak. We know we can change the trajectory. We know we can be the first generation to actually stop destroying species and bring them back. We know we need scale. We can't do it in little tiny pockets one by one. We need to do it together. We need to do it in collaboration. And we know we need you. We need people that are as passionate as you guys are. We need a next generation that sees you and hears and wants to get involved. We need you to make a species pledge. I don't care what you're going to save. Just write it down and send it to us at Reverse the Red, and Mike will start helping you to make that dream come true. The session is available on YouTube. Send it out to your fans, send it out to your friends and family. Let's get everybody behind this movement of making a change for species. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the work that you do every day. It really has been an incredible privilege to be with you all this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.